I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Elie Jacobs.
Big core distinction that we always make with clients is brand is what you say you do, reputation is what everybody else says you do. And when the difference between those things is broader, when the expectation of the public is different than what your expectation is that you're giving them, that's when problems really happen. So it's harder to develop that reputation if there aren't the means of reaching people that are going to give you that reputation.
Elie Jacobs is a founding partner at Purposeful Advisors. Elie has more than 2 decades of experience as a public affairs and strategic communications professional. He began his communications career as a press aide in the post-presidential office of President Bill Clinton, handling Clinton's briefing materials and working with the news media. He has worked for some of the world's leading public affairs and strategic communications consultancies, including Brunswick Group, Public Strategies, Sloane Company, Glover Park Group, and Kivvit. He has served as a senior advisor to a leading global strategic advisory firm and is a sought-after advisor for political candidates and elected officials. My interview with Elie Jacobs is coming right up. But first...
My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day, my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
The NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets. Guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Elie Jacobs, welcome to On Brand.
Great to be here. Thanks so much.
So I have to ask, what is the purpose of Purposeful Advisors?
We get that question a lot, and it's a little bit of a misnomer because generally when people think about purpose in kind of today's communications and marketing landscape, they think about ESG issues, planting trees, giving back to the community, all that kind of great stuff, which, far be it from us to say that people shouldn't do that. But when we talk about purpose, we're really talking about helping companies either at the beginning stages of their existence or even if they've been around a long time, really go back to basics and figure out what their purpose is. We kind of in our bones believe that if you lose sight of what your purpose is, that's when things can start to go off the rails. Therefore, if you always have sight of that, you're insulated from making mistakes or having bad things happen to you.
I love that and wanna dive right in and talk more about your work. But one thing that I wanted to make sure that we get in there is I think, not everyone listening, probably not, has worked for a former president. And in talking about your work, I also do think that that's probably sort of a unique communication challenge that could have application across other sectors, leadership and personality types as well. So, what was that experience like in terms of working with the press for a public figure in a very different role?
It was an incredible experience. It was only about 8 or 9 months, but I started a year to the day from when he left office. So it was an interesting time to be a part of what he was trying to do, which at that point was kind of a combination of make some money, figure out what to do with his life, support his wife and kid, and finish writing the book. And having had no experience in media relations or communications before I ended up in the office by, sheer dumb luck, I basically just sent in a resume. I suddenly found myself as essentially the deputy press secretary, working with a wonderful woman named Julia Payne, who's the communications director and kind of has remained a mentor of mine for a very long time now. But, it's from 1 minute to the next. It could be anything. You've got Larry King calling on one line, and then you've got correspondence letters to respond to, kids' questions so they can write an article for their class. Not every kid gets the response from the president's office, but every now and again, something like that will happen. And it was very much getting tossed into about the deepest end you can imagine, because everything that you say, everything that you write reflects on him. And it's essential to get things right and not mislead people, not suggest things that aren't going to happen, not say something that could get him in trouble, either as a former president or the husband of a sitting senator. And don't forget, when he left office, the Star reports were still sort of open. It was a complicated time to be for him, most certainly. His latest book, Citizen, he talks about kind of trying to figure out what he was going to be doing. But it was a phenomenal experience and absolutely foundational. There's sort of a through line from that to where I am now.
That's fascinating, especially, there was so much more there than initially I even thought. But now that you say all that, it is a really interesting kind of challenging window of time. It brings me to, in your diverse career does not have to be working in the Clinton office, but beyond that, what are some of the stickier issues that you've found yourself facing?
Well, I've done a lot of crisis work over my career, some of which I can talk about, some of which I can't.
Right.
Um,
So of what you can talk about.
yeah. Again, part of it is sort of, a crisis means different things to different people. So for what a company could be going through, for them, it could be, an existential issue. You as the consultant, it's not that big of a deal. And it's kind of trying to keep those sorts of things in perspective. So for instance, a contested merger and acquisition is a very sticky situation. It's very challenging. In particular, one that I worked on, and this goes back almost 20 years. I was at Brunswick Group at the time, and we were working with CNOOC, which was a Chinese national oil company, and they were trying to buy Chevron. They were trying to buy Unocal. And then Chevron came in and tried to buy Unocal. Unocal is a California-based oil and gas company. And it was kind of this remarkable moment over the summer of 2005 where suddenly everybody in the business press started to learn about what CFIUS is, which is the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States. And every little thing that was being dropped into, pebbles. One day we were seeing in the news that apparently Unocal had, nuclear technology to dig wells deep underwater. Therefore, the Chinese couldn't own it, which wasn't true. But it was just sort of that kind of ongoing back and forth of pushing back rumors, trying to position the company for success. At the end of the day, they decided not to pursue the bid. But that's one example. Another example was working with a Russian oligarch who was trying to a Russian oligarch, not a particularly well-known one. Let me start with that. Who was trying to break into the United States, not break into in an illegal way, but he was trying to become an investor into companies in the United States with all sort of the I'll say the shadow of things that exist over an oligarch's head. And then it's things working with a fast food company where somebody found a finger in their food. So it's the whole range and gamut of big, juicy geopolitical kind of mergers and acquisitions that are crisis based to, a mom and pop shop that got a bad review on Yelp, and you have to figure out how to get that fixed or at least get pushed down in the rankings. Again, it's all size and scope when it comes to a crisis situation.
Are there any common denominators that you see in any of that? Any factors that cut across responding to various types of crises?
Sure. I think when you're talking about a crisis, the commonalities between all crises are they're fast moving, they're throwing you off your day-to-day schedule, and there's a confusion. Those are three things that are just, common to any crisis, regardless of how large or how small. And that's when you really do need to go back down to brass tacks and understand what's happening, why it's happening, what you need to do to stop it from happening or fix it. And then how do you rebuild on the back end of that, which is, if you enter a crisis and don't immediately have an idea of what you want to look like on the other side of it, that's poor planning. You can't just get through. You can't just go around it. You got to go through and have an idea of what you want to look like on the other side as well. But one of the things that we're trying to do at Purposeful is really get clients to wrap their heads around that there are risks, there are issues, and there are crises. And those are three distinct things that are all interrelated, obviously. And to give you, not to get too technical, but the analogy that I've found that people can kind of, that helps me understand it, so I hope it helps other people as well, is there are inherent risks with air travel. You're flying, you're defeating gravity, there's pressure, you're floating high in the air, et cetera. There are inherent risks in that. There are objective inherent risks. An issue is if you're on a plane made by Boeing, and a crisis is when a door blows off, right? So like there's a cascading ladder of things there, and some of those things you can take care of in advance so that hopefully that crisis situation doesn't happen. While most crises aren't necessarily preventable, for most companies, it's relatively predictable, the things that are going to go wrong. There are obviously, acts of God and black swan events that you just can have no idea that they're going to happen. But with some creative thought and some brainstorming, you can really kind of start identifying the risks, the issues, and then the potential crises so that you can either fix the issues before they become problematic or have plans in place so that the crisis can be dealt with in an efficient, effective manner, as opposed to hair on fire. Let's, put the car back together as it's blowing up.
Yeah. No, that was going to be my follow-up question, because I'd heard, of the hierarchy of issue and crisis, but I think that foundational level of risk gives a better snapshot of kind of the big picture there as well. I wonder if you'd talk about the role that time plays in crisis communication, because I feel like there's kind of a conventional wisdom, like if you ask people what they know about crisis communication, an assumption would be, you got to get right out there. Is getting right out there always the best answer, or when might it not be?
In general, it's not. Because I said, one of the core elements of a crisis is confusion.
Yeah.
So the chances of really having an idea of what's going on and who's being impacted or who will be impacted is very slim in those first beginning parts of a crisis. So getting out there and saying anything other than, we're looking into it, we're trying to fix it, we're working, we're putting things in place to help the victims, or whatever the situation may be, going past that is really dangerous. I noticed that. I think it was on Monday, the CEO of United Health Group, the parent company of United Insurance, which unfortunately, the CEO was killed 2 weeks ago, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, and it was headlined, work with us, let us fix healthcare together, which, I kind of thought it was interesting that he went to the New York Times to write this piece.
Uh-huh.
But the piece itself didn't come up with any solutions. Which to me was kind of a lunacy. Like, you're being castigated in the media, and it was a god awful event, and his friends, his family, everybody should be concerned for them. But at the end of the day, there is natural anger about the insurance industry, and to go out there without saying, we're going to do X, Y, and Z to make our customers' lives better, to me just seemed irresponsible.
On Brand, we'll be right back after this.
My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Now, back to the show. So, in talking about the role that timing plays, and I love that you brought it back to that other key identifier in crisis of confusion. And in the example from the news recently, you know, sometimes maybe this is like the crisis communication version of Mythbusters, but I feel like something else you hear in addition to getting right out there, or as a follow up to that, is we need some kind of a holding message out
Yeah.
there. And maybe that example that you mentioned in the New York Times op-ed without any real there is an example of that holding message strategy. Is there a place for that type of approach?
There is. I think, when you start doing crisis planning, crisis communication planning, one of the things that you do is you develop holding statements for various different scenarios. So that you're at least working with something in advance, particularly if you're a publicly traded company or even a large company, some small companies as well. Things need to go through legal. So if you can have mild sign off in advance, that just speeds up the timeline. One of the things you don't want to happen in the midst of a crisis is to lose the narrative, right? Because if something bad happened, people are paying attention to it. Other voices are going to start filling that void. So that's why, there's the idea that you need to get out there with something. You just have to be careful about what that is. And that's sort of when these very bland, vanilla, not particularly interesting, not particularly informative statements come into play, because it's at least feeding the beast something, so that you're not being taken out of the story completely, and at least creates hopefully an open line of communication with the reporters or the general public that are paying attention to it.
That's a good point, and a good distinction as well. As we talk about the media landscape, this episode comes out, we're at the beginning of a new year. That I feel like this could be like the prologue to podcast episodes over the past several years in the new year, but where we're facing a great deal of uncertainty. But I feel like we've kicked it up a notch, and we've things are even more uncertain. And chief among those is how entities are interacting with an increasingly fractured media audience consuming media differently. How can we plan and manage communication into such a fractured space?
It's the question a lot of us are struggling with, right? I mean, it literally is the $1 billion question. At the end of the day, right now, we're looking at a situation where the means of reaching people, the general public, is fundamentally broken. And it's getting pieced back together in some very bizarre and interesting ways, many of which are not necessarily helpful for actually fixing the problem. When everybody's talking to everyone, no one's hearing anything. So that's why you kind of need, media being the fourth estate, right? You need them being the objective observers who are not necessarily opining, but reporting on the facts of a story, and breaking big stories and covering the news on a day-to-day basis. But you're right. The trust in media is down on both sides of the aisle. It's not just a Republican issue. The media landscape itself is shrinking drastically. I think at some point over the last couple of years, there was like 1.5 local newspapers closing a month across the country. The large papers themselves are not in terrific shape either. The Washington Post is a mess right now. The Wall Street Journal is doing pretty well. I spend actually a lot more of my time reading the Financial Times than I do some of the other newspapers these days. So I think some of it is you have to go back to basics. Some of it is having those relationships with core reporters and core editors. But the other part of that is you have to have a story to tell. And clients who come to you and say, I want to be in the Wall Street Journal, which we have clients that say that all the time. The first question I turn around with always is, are you ready for that? That's a colonoscopy that not every company is ready for or actually wants when they actually start thinking about it. So it is putting all those pieces in place where you're getting your story out there in various different channels through trade media or through, substacks that are of particular interest to your core group of stakeholders, whether those are customers or employees, potential customers, regulators, whoever it might be, and then building third-party allies who can be the people who are going to be there to help you emerge from a crisis or just build your brand up, right? The big core distinction that we always make with clients is, brand is what you say you do, reputation is what everybody else says you do. And when the difference between those things is broader, that's when problems happen. When the expectation of the public is different than what your expectation is that you're giving them, that's when problems really happen. So it's harder to develop that reputation if there aren't the means of reaching people that are going to give you that reputation. So you're just out there kind of spouting your brand, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what people are hearing on the other side or what their expectations are. So you're 100% right. It is an incredibly challenging environment right now. I think that there are a lot of companies, a lot of consultants, a lot of consulting firms that are trying to figure out their way around it. I don't think the answer is just creating content and going directly to potential clients or customers. Again, kind of the stakeholder group, however you want to define what that is. I think that there still has to be a place for the fourth estate to have this kind of referee that will help guide whether or not your brand and your reputation are in sync.
Well, that's, if that was the billion-dollar question and answer, I would I would add in there as well. I think you kind of hit on another aspect of that is, and you look at it just in terms of the continuing evolution of media properties as a business, as NBC looks at offloading cable. The role of the fourth estate, it's certainly there, but the business model that supports that seems, the only word that I can definitively land on is squishy.
Yeah, I think I would have used an F word there, but it also works.
Yeah, that too.
I mean, it is, right? Like I saw some article the other day that we've now hit sort of the point of the streaming wars where the average person is spending more on all their different streaming services than they were on cable television before kind of cord cutting became the big the in vogue thing. And part of that means that companies that news bureaus in particular, NBC, CNN, whoever, MSNBC, Fox, whoever it might be, they've had to reimagine what their revenue streams are. If they're not getting eyeballs on a regular basis and they're not seeing those ad dollars come in, it is, how do you make up for that money? Because you need money to have bureaus around the world and hire reporters and editors and producers and video editors and et cetera, buy airtime, so part of it is you have to offer a better product. That's a big part of it, right? Like I think right now the New York Times is struggling in part because in a large way, it's not delivering a terrific product right now. MSNBC is delivering a product, but to a very small slice of the population. CNN is the same way. Fox also, the average Fox show, even with those big numbers, is nothing compared to what the nightly news usually gets now, right? Just the regular network nightly news. So it's figuring out, where are those streams coming from? How can you really be effective with less dollars while still having good enough talent that you're going to be able to put out a good product, which people are going to want to advertise, which is going to put eyeballs in front of it and kind of get that cycle going. So I don't have answers. If I did, I'd probably, be auditioning to be the head of some major network right now.
Well, that's how we get the $1 billion for all of these questions and answers. So with all this complexity, as we begin to wrap things up, if someone's looking at their media and communication strategy in the year ahead, what's one thing that probably has not crossed their mind that should?
One thing is kind of hard to pull it back to, but I would say particularly with kind of the vibe that 2024 was in terms of self-generated content. Content is not engagement. It's exposure. And those are two different things. Just because you're putting it out there doesn't mean anybody's seeing it or that the right people are seeing it, right? Social media in particular is very bad at reaching the people that you want it to reach because you can't target it and the algorithm sends it everywhere. So I think, really understanding the role of content, of earned media, of paid media, of piggybacking on other people's news or working together with somebody that you might have a symbiotic relationship with so that you can both get ahead. I think it really boils down to understanding what the role is of each of these things and figuring out how they relate to each other, because it seems, every couple of years, the scales go different ways on different things. Oh, we got to do a lot of paid this year. Oh, we need to do more earned. Earned is going to be really hard. Paid might not get you to the places that you want to get to. Self-generated content is likely not getting you to the places that you want to get to. It's got to be, that combination of everything and in a smart, strategic way so that you are hitting the people that you need to hit and not just, shouting at the wind.
Well, that is as simple as we can get that. Well, we'll lighten the load here with our actual final question. We are looking for, Elie, a brand that has made you smile recently.
So there are two. I'll tell you one that made me smile for an interesting reason. It's a company called Gaggenau. They make very, very high-end appliances. And the only reason I know who they are or what they make is I was flipping through the Harvard Business Review a few weeks ago, and the first ad in the magazine was for a Rolex. The second ad was for a Patek Philippe. They're aiming at a particular kind of consumer in this magazine. And then I turn the page, and then there's this company that just says, the ad just says, "For those who know," and it has a picture of something that I couldn't tell what it was. And that was it. That was what the ad was. So I actually had to spend the time to look it up because I was so curious to know what these people did. And apparently they make very, very high-end kitchen appliances.
Wow.
And that just made me smile. Like you so infrequently come across a brand that you are just completely in the dark about. So I like that.
and it's also kind of fun, smile, ironic too, because for those who know, and it's like, I feel like I know that, but then that's not the brand that I would have known, but now I do.
Exactly.
So
now I know. I'm in this little club that they're creating.
Yeah, it's like
not necessarily a customer, but at least I'm somebody who knows.
No, but it's like a microcosm or a microscopic brand communication strategy, and definitely useful in cutting through everything out there. So, Elie, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So Purposeful ADV, AlexDavidVictor.com, PurposefulADV.com is Purposeful Advisors homepage. You can learn more about me and my business partner, Frank DiMaria, and some of our other senior advisors. We don't have a ton of information on the website. We kind of went kind of back to basics this year when we relaunched it. You can find me on LinkedIn. And I'm not particularly active any longer on any other social media at this point. I just don't see the point, and I feel like my blood pressure is better for it.
You said it right there. Yeah, LinkedIn is the best, and that's not even an ad, even though there might be one inserted into this podcast. Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes, which folks can always find at onbrandpodcast.com. Elie Jacobs, thanks for being on brand with us.
My pleasure. This was great.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.